Let's get nerdy. I got quite personal in my last two videos, knitting a wraparound cardigan and knitting with cashmere. And I don't mind doing that. I really don't mind letting you guys in on who I am as a person. And this often leads to a few of you DMing me, and honestly, I enjoy the relationship building. But today I wanted to hyperfixate on fibers, quite specifically a merino-linen blend. Just pardon my little friend here, I'm trying to work out audio. It's been an adventure, it's been a journey. Anyway, let's stay on track. So in today's vlog, we're going to talk about a yarn blend that shouldn't work, but it does. The one fiber comes from sheep and the other fiber comes from a plant. The one is soft, elastic, springy, warm. The other is cool, crisp, and structured. And together they create one of the most beautiful fabrics for a summer tee. So in my last video, I spoke about knitting this particular pattern, which is the cashmere outside tee. And I briefly touched on the fact that I was making a second sample in a merino linen blend. This one over here to be particular. And while I've been knitting up the second tee, the cashmere outside tee, I've been getting really engrossed in the textures of those two fibers together. Not just the texture, but how it looks. It sent me on a bit of a deep dive as to what exactly this fiber is, the merino linen blend. And if you like fiber history lessons, buckle up, because I've got one for you. So let's go all the way back. The origin story of the merino sheep. So the merino story started in Spain in around about the 1700s. The sheep was bred very specifically for its beautiful fiber. The fiber in particular was very thin as opposed to coarse. So think of it kind of like human hair. We all have different hair. Some of us have thinner hair, some of us have thicker hair in the particular strands. Sheep are, can you imagine, exactly the same. There are so many different kinds of breeds and they all have their own kind of hair fiber. So back to Spain and the Spanish king. I didn't look up his name, but he was the king at the time, 1700s, and he had bred this particular strain of merino sheep that had superior hair follicles. And basically they were so very, very super soft. It produced the best sheep fiber in the world. And it was very closely guarded. It was something that was incredibly important and special to this man. So much so that these sheep were guarded. They stayed on the castle grounds and they never really left. Until somehow the Brits found out about this incredible, beautiful merino yarn. And they started working out a way to get their hands on this incredible fiber. And they came up with a plan, and it looked a little bit like colonization. What happened was, in the Southern Hemisphere, quite a few countries were busy being colonized. In South America, in South Africa, and also in Australia. And Spain was already in South Africa. Spain was already in Southern Africa, and they had a little bit of sheep with them. The British Empire managed to get hold of a couple of sheep, I think by gift. I think that's how that happened. And they sent over a small flock to Australia, which was part of the Commonwealth at the time. And while South America and South Africa were perfect breeding grounds for merino sheep, Australia turned out to be quite superior because of its vast savanna grasslands, and very quickly became a dominant merino superpower. While that was all happening, these merino sheep in the Australian Commonwealth made their way back to a small town in near Yorkshire, and they started harvesting and producing merino yarn there, and those fibers were then used for the royal family. And slowly but surely, merino yarn infiltrated the whole world, and it quickly became an incredibly popular fiber. Which honestly, if you think about it, is so cool, because all of these fibers that we're knitting with now have so much history. So that's a brief synopsis on why merino wool is special, as opposed to all the other different kinds. There are very many different sheep wools, but merino wool was and has for the longest time been superior in terms of its very soft quality. So how does it turn from a sheep into this beautiful fiber that we knit with? Basically what happens is sheep are shorn once a year typically, and shearing is the process of shaving the little sheepy. Normally the farmer is going to come in, the farmer or the shearer, that is an actual professional job, will come in with a pair of scissors or a shaver, and they'll start somewhere around here and they'll try and work the entire coat off the sheep in one big piece. So that's called shearing. And after that comes a process called skirting and grading. And basically what that is they'll go into that big mat of sheep fur and they'll pick out as much organic matter as they can. Things like the hay that the sheepies sleep in, the bits of foliage that it frolics in, and the little dingleberries in its back. And once all of these dirty fibery matters have been removed, the fleece can now be graded. It can be checked for quality. Things they're typically going to look for is, like previously discussed, how thick or how thin is the sheepy's hair, how long is it, how coarse is the curl, and by those definitions the value will be determined. If it's considered to be of suitable value, it is then put through a scouring process. This is just another word for washing it. So then they put the fleece into warm soapy water and they wash away any additional grit that may still be in there. And on top of that, any of the natural oils that the sheepy produces while he is sweating, the oils and also the salts. And after scouring, what remains will be the clean fiber. Next up comes a process called carding. So carding is when they open up the fibers and they line them up, and from there they get transformed into a soft rope, which is called a sliver. And then the slivers go through a combing process. Combing basically removes any shorter fibers and lines the longer ones up parallel. And why they would do that is because it then creates a stronger fiber with less of a halo, which is basically fuzz. It then enters the spinning phase, where it is now spun intentionally, and then more than one sliver will be locked together in opposite chains. This process then becomes plying, and if you know anything about plying, the amount that the yarn, the fiber has been plied matters significantly, because a higher twist will result in a fiber that's a lot stronger, a lot more durable. It's something that you can use for socks, for example, and something with a much gentler twist, a lighter ply, for example a single ply, which means it's only been lightly twisted once, can actually quite easily move back into its original form. And this also has its benefits. It's great for things like stitches that you want to bloom, lacy stitches, things like shawls and accessories, anything soft and close to your face and neck. And then finally, it will be steamed and set aside to finish. And that's the whole story of how we get yarn from merino, from the sheep to the skein. Insert a little side rant about pilling. So does merino wool pull more? In short, yes it does. And the reason for that is because it's so soft. It's not a coarse wool, so it doesn't have that intense durability that other fibers can offer. So what is pilling? Well, pilling is when the shorter fibers migrate up to the surface of the garment, and then friction then gathers all of those fibers together into tiny little balls. And the reason this happens is because fine fibers are very flexible and they can easily escape these twists. I'm going to make a whole separate video on my thoughts on pilling because it's such a loaded subject in the knitting community, and I have some strong thoughts and feelings about it. In a brief summary, I don't have an issue with pilling. I don't think it's problematic at all. I will always choose a softer, more luxurious fiber and have to shave it than a coarser fiber that can withstand a lot of friction. But in conclusion, softness and durability are always in competition, and that's where linen enters this conversation. But before we drop the flocks and talk facts about flax, I wanted to bring up one last really important topic, and that is the ethics around yarn and sheep fibers. I'm going to skirt around the subject as delicately as I can because I want to make this channel child friendly, but I also want to make sure that animals are getting the proper representation because they don't have a voice and I do. So I'm going to talk about muesling, and I'm going to talk about it as politely as I possibly can. What is muesling? Sheep are sometimes susceptible to a thing called fly strike. And what that is little fly eggs that are laid in the fur around the bum area. This can lead to a pretty nasty situation, and what farmers will often do to prevent this is they remove the skin around that area of the sheep and they allow it to develop into scar tissue so that the hair doesn't grow back. This isn't always done ethically. In fact, it isn't, and that's why it is a conversation of ethics, because a lot of the merino sheep that we are enjoying the fleece from have gone through this procedure. That is all I'm going to go into on this subject because it's a very heated debate and it's a very, very sensitive topic. But I just wanted to say this, that you can get muesling free yarn. You can, and I do. I will only ever work with muesling free yarn. It will say on the actual fibers label if it is either muesling free or if it meets certain ethical standards. You can look it up. You don't have to take this advice, but I would recommend using muesling free yarn. Anyway, that out the way, let's get back to the flax. So I had no idea that linen came from flax seeds, no idea whatsoever. I actually eat flax almost every single day. And now for this next bit, I beg your pardon, but I'm about to go really, really deep and get really, really nerdy because I am rapidly becoming a massive linen fangirl. And here's the reason why. Did you know that linen is one of the oldest textiles in all of human history? It has been traced back to up to 50,000 years ago in certain places of the world. But it's in ancient Egypt that linen really truly becomes iconic in literally every regard, to the extent of wrapping their babies in linen, wearing linen daily, and wrapping their deceased in linen too, as in mummies. It also had a lot of symbology around light and purity, and that is a whole nother subtopic that I absolutely would love to go into because I'm quite a spiritual girly, and the spiritual connections between linen are a lot. But back to the fiber. Back in the ancient days, it was a sign of wealth and refinement, because unlike wool, which is super insulating and very, very warm, linen actually repels heat and keeps the skin cool. It's perfect in very, very hot places like northern Africa and across the sea in the Mediterranean. Linen was the original it girl before cotton became a whole thing. But the thing about linen that I'm not too sure we truly understand is just how labor intensive it is to procure this fiber. From literally the moment you put the seed in the ground to the way the plant grows and the speed at which it grows, because it's quite a long spindly plant, to when you harvest it, quite specific how you harvest it, and then the processes that follow after harvesting. So basically, linen is the line fibers that run up the stem of the plant. And in order to get the lines out, the plant needs to go through a kind of a rotting process, which is where they soak it in a particular kind of a solution, a natural solution usually, which will remove the glue from the outer stem and makes it easier to get those lines out in one full piece, which is kind of the whole point. And once the linen's been harvested and released from the follicles, This is when the particularly hard part starts, because it still very much represents a raw plant matter. Kind of think of like dried grass. You can almost think a little bit of like thin spindly hay. It's very hard, it's still very crisp. And so the linen will now go through a process of just basically beating the ever-loving business out of it until it becomes floopy and soft like hay. After this, they can begin the process of combing it, quite similar to the sheep. Combing it, separating the long fibers from the shorter fibers. The longer fibers are obviously more superior, and then they can go through the process of being spun. And then we can undergo the process of turning the linen into some kind of a fabric. And this is why linen carried so much prestige, because it wasn't just a fabric, it was a fabric that you needed to work so hard to make. And that's not all. Linen ages so beautifully. It's one of those heirloom fabrics. It literally just gets softer and drapier and softer and drapier as you wear and wash it. As far as fabric goes, that's pretty rare. What makes linen a superior fabric? Well, it's highly breathable, it's moisture absorbent while still being quick to dry and naturally resilient to pilling. You know, the thing we hate. Things that could potentially be a downside of linen is it has very low elasticity, which means once you've put it in a particular shape, it's going to stay like that. And also without elasticity, it's difficult for it to give it shaping. Another thing about it is it starts out very durable and you have to work to make it so soft and luxurious, meaning oftentimes knitting with it will feel extremely labor intensive. You may even get pain along the top of your hand and your forearm because those stitches are not forgiving you while you're knitting them. So it's just really an amazing ancient fiber that I could go into probably for longer, but I will probably save that for another rant. Next, what happens when we combine the two, merino with linen? First, I think let's break down how do we blend them, because these two fibers behave very differently. So there are basically two main ways to do it. The first way is to blend those two fibers together before they have been twisted. And the second is to blend the two fibers together after they've been twisted. The first one will literally involve taking a percentage of linen and a percentage of merino, blending them together, smashing them together, and then taking that substance and twisting it into a thread. The second one involves taking the merino as a singular and the linen as a singular and then blending them together like that. Either way, it's not that simple because the linen wants to stand up straight and the merino is going to want to curl. So the spinner is going to have some experience with balancing these two structures together. But if it's done correctly, the linen actually reinforces the merino and gives it strength, and the merino will give the linen forgiveness. In certain higher percentages, it will also reduce halo altogether and maybe take care of any pilling. And on top of that, it's also going to give you much better stitch definition. But the percentage of how much of each you add to this blend is going to make a massive difference to how this fabric is ultimately going to behave. Like for example, a 90% merino, 10% linen blend is going to behave completely different to a 50-50 blend. Also, once it's gone past the 50-50 mark, this yarn starts to behave a lot more like a plant fiber and a lot less like a protein fiber. I'm just going to quickly break down the percentages because I think it's relevant, and when we're thinking about a pattern and what to make with the fiber, I think the more educated you are, the more informed you are to make a really good choice, because ultimately we want something that falls on our bodies the way we envision it to. So we start at the very beginning with 90% merino and a 10% linen. This percentage is pretty low, so it's really only going to add a little bit of strength. It's going to add a little bit of a natural linen fuzz to the fiber, ironically. It's also going to remove any pilling, and it will give the fiber a lot more structure, specifically in the stitches. Essentially, it's just a little bit of subtle strength and stitch definition with some hints of flex of the linen. Next we have a 70% merino and a 30% linen, which is what I'm actually busy working with. Here you can kind of see what I mean by the flex of linen and the slight tonal variation. Here you can get a much better idea of how that's going to look knitted out. Can you see how the linen, it's the little white fluffy bits. Can you see how it plays between the merino, and it gives it that very rustic, natural, beautiful look. Now, I don't know if I'm catching this on camera, but it also has a fuzzy, I want to call it a halo, but it's not a natural protein halo, it's actually a plant-based linen halo. Already at this percentage, we're going to see a lot less spring. It's going to have a lot more drape. My stitch definition is going to be looking a lot sharper, although you will see these little flecks in almost every stitch. So at this point, it's very much becoming a texture thing, while simultaneously getting cooler and a lot more heat resistant. But it's still very soft. It's just going to start to begin to move a little differently. Once we hit a 50-50 linen merino blend, we start moving into plant fibre behaviour. Your stitches are going to start to become a little bit more difficult to work with, a lot less forgiveness, a lot less bounce back, but you're starting to get a lot more sheen. You'll also get a lot more drape, and you'll get a lot of durability. It's going to be a lot smoother, and it's also going to dry a lot faster, and obviously it's also going to be very cool. Next, it's going to behave differently during the blocking process, because now we're getting the longevity and extra drape every time we wash this garment. But this is where we're going to have to start being really careful around borders like your neckline, any sleeve work or cuff work, and also the hem, because you're not going to see that nice snuggy definition that you would usually get from wool. You're going to see a lot more looseness and drape, which means you're going to have to account for that somehow. The next important conversation that needs to be had about this blend is how it feels against your skin. So everybody has a skin sensitivity range. Some have super sensitive skin and cannot have even mohair touching them, and other people have like iron skin, like AI. If you fall into the top tier sensitivity level, I'm not sure I would recommend a merino linen blend to you, because you probably would feel it's a little bit scratchy. Notice every time one of those little fibers touches your skin. If you're sensitive but not really too sensitive, I think you can start to experiment with the higher blends, especially after you've washed them or blocked them a few times. If you're right in the middle, average level sensitivity, not too sensitive, not really not sensitive, you might actually find this fiber really refined. I think I fall into this category. I don't really have super sensitive skin, but I do notice certain textures. And I personally am finding this to be one of the softest fibers I've worked with. And I just made a cashmere tee, but I'm not saying it's buttery like cashmere. It's softer in like a smooth way. Low sensitivity, you can just pretty much do anything you like. And that would go for iron skin as well. Just play, have fun, do you. And for the final installment of my merino linen nerdumentary is gonna be one last sensitive topic, which I find so fascinating that I've managed to hit no less than 3 nerves while just trying to do a little documentary on the history of merino linen. And that final nerve we're going to hit is conversations around merino linen blends, specifically in religion. So I managed to find merino linen conversations in no less than 2 religious sects. The first sect was Judaism and the second sect was paganism. They both had fairly opposing opinions on people wearing merino linen blends. So first, in Judaism, in their holy books, there is a commandment, a law, a religious law that says you are not allowed to wear merino linen blends. Quite specifically the blend. It's not that you can't wear, and to clarify, it's not merino specifically, it is wool. Wool and linen blends altogether are forbidden. And it's fine if you wear a linen t-shirt and a woolen jumper on top of that. It's not fine if you're wearing a fabric that has this blend in it. The commandment was fairly straightforward, just don't do it, which I found very interesting. And with my type of personality, when you tell me not to do something, there's always going to be a why. And satiating my whys was kind of hard without doing deep research, but with a mid-level research, I found a few supporting answers. The first few, which weren't really satisfactory to me, were comparisons of tales in the holy book, the Judaic holy book, of tragedies and how the blend of the two fabrics, linen with wool, was representing these tragic stories, but that didn't seem like a sufficient reason to make it completely forbidden. So upon further probing, I found one moderately satisfying answer, and that was that the blend of wool and linen, the literal fabric itself, was reserved for holy men only, and that anyone who was not of the same caliber was not allowed to wear it because this fabric was so very special and revered amongst the holy men specifically. There was mention of people who are not of a particular level of religious sect, as in you're not a practicing rabbi, or if there's higher denominations, couldn't understand the significant importance of this fibre. And I was kind of left at that, and I found that incredibly fascinating, and I did go on a deeper dive, but I definitely want to keep this channel as neutral and as child-friendly as possible. So if you yourself are interested, definitely look it up, it's interesting. But what I found even more interesting was the supporting answers in the pagan religion. So a little bit of context as to why this is so particularly fascinating to me is because I have strong ties on my maternal side with both Judaic and paganism. On my maternal side, there is one practicing witch and one deceased 33-degree Mason. Both of these individuals were very affiliated with the Judaic sect in a Platonic way, and I'm wondering now if maybe there was some kinship that I didn't really understand. So in the pagan sect, linen and wool cloth is used during rituals and while they're performing ceremonies. They did provide a little bit more information as to why this cloth was so special. They believe that it has a significantly high vibrational content and it can facilitate these rituals and ceremonies energetically, which I will say I found exceptionally fascinating. And again, I went on a whole deep dive on this, and I discovered that different things emit different frequencies. Scientific, not religious, not spiritual, not woo-woo, just science. You can actually measure the frequency that an object is emitting. And I discovered that human beings, we emit a frequency of around 100 hertz. Linen is considered very high vibrational. It emits a frequency of 1,000 hertz. And then wool is equally high vibrational. It too emits a frequency of 1,000 hertz. But interestingly, when you pair the two together in a literal blend, they cancel each other's energetic frequency out and are reduced to a 0 hertz. And I found some more supporting information in the pagan deep dive saying that they believe it is used sometimes to open portals, but I'm gonna leave it at that. Anyway, that's my whole long deep dive on merino linen, why it's interesting, why it's special. I definitely will make a few more teas out of a merino linen blend. I would love to try a 50-50 or higher in the linen content. I'm also going to make a tea out of 100% linen because I've never done that, and I'm very interested to work with linen after doing this whole research. It's so interesting. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, if you're still here, could you please hit a little subscribe for me? It really helps me out. And I'll see you in the next one in another deep dive on nerdy knitting topics.